everyone, Michael here for Tactica, Imperialis, and welcome to today's video. Today is episode 32 of Adeptus Podcastus. I think it's 32, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
It is. And joining us, as always, are Remlays from 40k Theories.
Hello, everyone.
Ego Queen Alexis.
Yo!
And a very, very special guest coming straight out of the Black Library, and I say that more literally than usual, given some of the upcoming releases. We have none other than Gav Thorpe.
Hello.
Yeah, I'm feeling very lucky that the rotation's on me right now. Because this is I actually remember when I first bought White Dwarf was when 5th edition came out for 40k, and you were in the first two issues I bought. You were in a battle report with Alicio playing with Abaddon, and then you wrote the Dark Elf Codex, or used the Dark Elf Codex, if I remember correctly.
I'll take your word for it. I think you're right, yes, probably.
Yeah, it was 2008. I have a random memory for random things. But yeah. So anyway, welcome to the show, and I hope you don't get too fed up with us by the end of it.
I'm sure I won't.
Hopefully so. And there will be a section of spoilers where we're discussing an upcoming or just brand new release, because I know Remlays is full of questions right now, having just read it.
Yes.
So that will be noted audibly and will be timestamped in the description as well. You have fair warning. So, in the news this week, because I still love saying that, chapter approved, I think, is probably the best place to start.
Yes.
So, I was waiting for somebody to say something. Yes, chapter approved. The basically balance pass and the equivalent to the General's Handbook for those Age of Sigmar people who are around for Warhammer 40,000, including custom rules, the return of old expansions, points changes, new stand-in faction rules, new missions, and all sorts of good stuff. I'm sure Alexis has... Yeah, go on.
I'm excited about this because build your own land. And the sisters get stratagems.
I know, I was thinking about it. So there's 11 factions who are getting stand-in rules equivalent to what you get in a codex. They are the Space Wolves, the Tau, the Thousand Suns, the Orcs, the Necrons, Imperial Knights, Harlequins, Dark Eldar, Genestealer Cults, Death Watch, and Sororitas. Which, if that's not a Sisters Codex spoiler, I don't know what is. I really don't.
Yeah, it's kind of a given. It's kind of a given at this point.
I mean, I'm not complaining. It's a bit long overdue, but indeed. So everyone's getting a relic, a warlord trait, and at least one stratagem, and some are getting more, so it's good.
If they give Sisters of Battle the ability to cast one more Act of Faith through a relic, I'm going to be super happy.
By which you mean you're going to be curb stomping everybody?
Well, I'm already doing that with Sisters.
Good point. Actually, I should ask Gav before. Have you got an army of your own on the go at the moment? What are you collecting?
I am literally at this moment painting some Dire Avenger guns, gold. As I talk to you, so I've had it Eldar for a long time. And 8th edition has kind of got me back into gaming with 40k again, really. Problem is, when I left the studio, I pretty much only brought my infantry with me, and they're very dated now as well. So my army lacks a little bit of variety at the moment. I've had a couple of games with the new 40k, but nothing, it's like just sort of just pushing some squads around to get used to it, sort of thing. Nothing in earnest yet. But so yeah, I've got some Dire Avengers to flesh out my troop types, and then I've got a Wraith Lord and a really old. I was recently just clearing out some drawers for moving some stuff around, and I found one of the original boxed Falcon Grav tanks with the artwork on the cover and stuff. Nice. So that was handy. So I can now add a Falcon as well to my army. So just have a little bit of variety, and then I'm going to add some jet bikes and who knows what else from then, and maybe update some of the infantry. But yes, so I'm very keen. I'm more on the narrative side than worrying about the points values. The narrative, like power level, just throw some models down is really handy. because I don't have to spend that too much time preparing then.
Agreed.
So.
And there's actually a lot of stuff for narrative play coming as well. So campaigns, the return of Planet Strike and Stronghold Assault, battle zones, so you can have special sort of battlefield setups, so like a psychic storm where you can literally turn anybody into a psyker. There's a lot of things for all sorts of players.
Yeah, I think that's the really good thing. It was hinted at a little bit of Age of Sigmar, but obviously they finessed it quite a lot with the 40k release of like streaming the three levels of kind of gaming and with the narrative and the match play, and then sort of the stuff in between. And I think you can actually use bits from the other ones, but yeah, it makes it nice and easy for me to kind of get back into it then, because I'm not having to worry too much about what's happening outside of my codex and things like that. I can concentrate just on getting some models painted. But it's fun. I mean, I just really enjoyed it, and they made it really accessible and easy to get back into it. So, which I think a lot of people found.
Yeah, I think you and Remlays will share quite a lot on that.
I still remember that issue of White Dwarf from like 1998 where it detailed the Games Workshop Staff Tournament. And I had a little bit about your Eldar army going up against Simon Shucker, who beat you only after playing the game for 2 weeks or something.
Right. Oh, yeah, it wouldn't surprise me, yeah.
Back when you had the really long hair.
Yes. Yeah, the tournaments were, I remember, yeah, they were, I think that's probably when we were first trying out the system, actually. I'm trying to think about dates. 98. I don't know, we probably hadn't gone a little while then. But, yeah, I've always been more on the narrative side, let's put it that way.
I think three of us will agree with you on that. Alexis is the most competitive of the four of us, definitely.
Right.
And obviously with Chapter Approved comes, as Alexis hinted at, for open play, the ability to customize a Land Raider, which is going to be hilarious / stupid / I don't even know. I just don't know.
As long as you can get the flying Land Raider again, which was always, because I think the original article was Jervis Johnson, because it was just one of those which should do some crazy stuff, I think, which allowed you to flying Land Raiders and things like that. Although I know a friend of mine
before my time,
yeah, and kind of like Land Raider chariots for dreadnoughts and things, basically.
that's fun.
Which is cool. Yeah, I think I've got a friend. Space Wolves player who's looking forward to doing that. Just having to carry one of his army of dreadnoughts. So
yeah, and hopefully there's rules in there about looted Land Raiders, because the Majorca army can have some fun as well.
Absolutely, yeah, that'd be cool.
The Blood Axes need more love.
Honestly, when the looted wagon disappeared from the Orc Codex it was either in 6th or in 7th, the looted wagon just disappeared. It was sad to see it go, because it was in the 4th edition codex. It was terrible, but it was hilarious.
Absolutely. In fact, looted anything, that's what you want.
Oh,
yeah. And you just see some great conversions and stuff at tournaments, and just store armies and stuff of people, like converted Tyranid creatures into wagons and stuff like that.
The looted Khan effects.
Yeah, exactly. And
always the looted Khan effects.
Yeah, looted Khan effects. And you just think, how? And you think, yeah, that's great, actually. I love that.
Indeed. Just speaking quickly for the match play people who haven't seen Warhammer Community this week, if you are a match play player, if you are one of them who spams the Imperium Golden Trio of Skillerman, Celestine, and Call, then sad face, they've got a point hike. In other news, the Harlequin Death Jester has gone down in cost. The Gorkanaut looks like it's gone down in cost. Thank you very much. As well as, I think that's the Chaos or Death Guard Champion, I think, has gone down. I can't quite tell from this little image. But yeah, hopefully that will help with some of the armies, along with the new faction rules, to just help if you're not one of the new armies, just to get a little bit more out of it, because I can only speak from my experience, but it's not fun sometimes. I'm sure Alexis will say different. Right. Is there anything else in the gaming world, or the
Necromunda's just been released?
Oh yeah,
small thing.
Oh yeah, just Necromunda.
Gorkamorka when? In fact, I've actually got my copy of that other book from the original Gorkamorka right now. Just looking through the Games Workshop design team's mobs, Back when Andy Chambers had a massive mullet.
Yes. Yes, that was good fun.
Quite the walk down memory lane.
I can never remember if I was a Gorka or a Morka now. I think I was a Morka, cunning but brutal.
Yeah.
So.
Yep, absolutely. Necromunda at the time of recording is about to go onto shelves. It will be on shelves for you now by the time you're watching this video. And it looks like it's set to take over many people's hobby tables in the run-up to Christmas.
I'm excited about this. Like, at first I wasn't excited about Necromunda. I was like, it's just going to be a skirmish game. It's going to be forgotten relatively quickly. But the more I look into it, the more I'm loving it.
Yeah, that's fair. By the way, Alex, did you see the point changes that they've talked about? So Celatine and Call and Gilliman are all getting points boosts.
I'm not going to joke. Celestine needs to be about 500 points before she's balanced.
Sheesh. By the way, we apologise for any audio that you might be having issues with. It's Black Friday, and Alexis is having to work, so we've had to bounce around some technical stuff to make this work. Just to let you all know.
I was listening to a podcast recently. It was a bit of an old one. A podcast called The Cryptid Factor, and a producer was phoning in from a Staples store because he had to use their PowerPoint to keep his thing on it. But then they closed halfway through the podcast, so you had to you can hear him out in the car park and go to his car and stuff. So whatever you're doing is probably an improvement on that.
Agreed. Also, talking of Christmas, as is tradition, we have the big army boxes coming out, and this time there's not a Space Marine one. This is a shock. Yes. So, yet. So if you are a Orc player, you can buy the Orc Cult of Speed, which has a mech with a shock attack gun, aka the slowest unit in the army.
That is not a Cult of Speed. That is just mech boys.
But to be honest, though, the Snotlings go very fast.
True.
True. So you got a squad of boys, a squad of looters/burners, a shock attack gun mech, 3 warbikers, a truck, and a battle wagon. I approve. The Gene Stealer cults has basically got everything they have. So
without the aberrants, we still can't buy aberrants. Give me my aberrants.
Yeah, you get a squad of guardsmen, but you don't get aberrants.
Just buy more box sets of Deathwatch Overkill.
I want to, but they're sold out.
Shame. The Imperial Guard, the Astra Militarum, have basically got an infantry platoon with some Ogrins and a Leman Russ, which is a pretty nice kit. And the Tau, for those who still care about Tau, have got the old Rapid Insertion Force with some extras. So it's a commander, 2 stealth teams, a crisis team, and a ghost kill. Where was this 12 months ago when I was building my Farsight bomb? God damn it. Like, seriously, I was waiting so long to get stealth and crisis teams. It just, that would have been perfect.
They also give inspiration.
For more competitive-based gamers, that would be perfect for converting up a bunch of commanders.
Yeah,
and stealth teams are really good.
Yeah, stealth teams are fun. Also, I love how it says for the Orcs, Gene Stealer cults, Astra Militarum, and Tau Empire, each of these armies is known for its high model count. It's Tau. No. Good try, though. And I suppose the biggest news in the lore sense, there was the Black Library Weekender last week.
Yes, that was a lot of fun. Yeah, and lots of books announced for the next year or so, and lots of panels and conversations talking about what we're going to be doing, or not talking about what we're going to be doing, depending on what the questions were.
Indeed. There's some very exciting releases I talked about in a video last week, such as the Space Marine Conquest series, which I'm really looking forward to.
Yes, yeah. I mean, Guy Haley's first one, Devastation of Baal, was already out, I think, and certainly it's available at the Weekender, along with my contribution, Ashes of Prospero. But yeah, it does sound there's going to be some very exciting titles in the series going forward, I think.
And
people don't want to explore the new Dark Imperium setting. Actually, Space Marine Conquest is going to be one of the key places to do it.
Yeah, and Phil Kelly's novel War of Secrets has got everybody talking about the Primaris Civil War,
Are we going to get a Sister Battle book where they're not dying?
I don't know. I'm not sure. I've got something a bit longer term planned with some sisters stuff where some of them will be dying, but they'll also be killing people. So.
Oh, you're my hero.
Yes, and we also got a bunch of novel covers, if nothing else. We can't really tell you much about them, but there's one of your contributions here, Imperator Wrath of the Omnissiah, which...
Yes. Yeah, so the pitch for that was it's the hunt for Red October with an Imperator Titan.
That sounds awesome.
That sounds awesome.
So, that's pretty much what everyone says. So, part of kind of like the occasional series celebrating Adeptus Titanicus and all things Titan. So I love that because that was one of my first Games Workshop loves really was Titans and Adeptus Titanicus.
Yeah, actually, my introduction to 40k, because I was a massive Pokemon fan back in the day when I was pre-teens, and my friend basically said, take all your legendary Pokemon, I bring in the Imperator Titan, squish. That was my first introduction to 40k. The one that actually is most interesting me is the Horus Heresy one, Wolfsbane.
Oh, yeah.
What on earth is going on here?
Yes, wolf versus wolf. But not quite necessarily as you might think. Yes, most essentially it's Lehman Russ taking it upon himself to try and have a tilt at Horus before things get irreversibly bad. I think that's probably points past. But yes, that's quite... But also, sort of kind of one of the last pieces to fall into place really before we move on to the Siege of Terror.
Yeah, and that's actually interesting looking at the two novels we've seen for the Horus Heresy at the weekend, which is Old Earth and Wolfsbane, because Old Earth talks about Vulcan going to Terra, and as far as the established canon has been up to this point, Vulcan never went to Terra.
Yep, that's good fun.
And with Wolfsbane, we know Russ was involved with Horus on Molech, but we never saw the two of them square off. And if this is one of the last pieces of the puzzle, is this Molech or is this something else? Because Russ wasn't at Terra, so I'm very intrigued to see where this is going.
Yeah, well, that's it. It's just trying to flesh out some of that stuff. I mean, the other one that's coming up is John Frenchie's Slaves to Darkness, which is kind of much more from the traitor side of stuff, and basically Horus marshalling the last of his forces and basically trying to get all these wayward brothers back into line and stop running off and doing their own thing and whatever. Half of them turned into demons by now. So no, remember, we're supposed to be trying to attack Terra. So that's that's really good. Again, just like looking at the characters on the traitor side and how they've kind of evolved.
Actually, that's one of my favorite things is just watching the traitors' interactions, because when Fulgrim becomes Demon Fulgrim and then becomes unpossessed and then, ascends to demonhood, he basically just talks down to Horus. It's really funny.
Yes. Yeah, people talk down to Horus usually only once. We'll see what happens. Yeah.
I'll agree that I remember reading, I might have this wrong, but Horus didn't really need to bother. Obviously, Slaves to Darkness will tell me the truth, but Horus was never fussed about Fulgrim because he just knew, Fulgrim will turn up when it's time. He can go do his thing. He'll be here. I just know it. And he was.
Yeah, there's a bit of that. There's the ones that will kind of respond and the ones that need more to be kind of lured or kind of cajoled or guided sort of thing. Again, that's one of the strengths of Horus really as a commander. It's his ability to kind of get people to do what he wants them to do, but not necessarily all the same way.
That level of charisma, in a way.
Yes, yeah, and just understanding them as well, what motivates them. So sort of like offering Fulgrim an opportunity, it's like, as you say, sort of he's just like, overthrow the Imperium. I'm really, that's kind of beneath me now. I'm not really bothered by all your silly human politics anymore. But he still has something over on Fulgrim or something to offer him to get him to turn up and play his part.
Absolutely. Also, Remlaze is here.
Hello.
So you've just been awfully quiet in the lore segment there. I was expecting you to be chipping in.
I've been enjoying listening to you guys talk about it, to be honest.
So yeah, I mean, I gave my... Go on, Al.
Remlaze is actually just sitting there fanboying.
Yeah, I gave my pre-event thoughts on the weekend in a video, Remlaze, but I don't suppose you've got any thoughts about the novels that you're most looking forward to if we haven't discussed them already.
Well, obviously I'm looking forward to the upcoming Horus Heresy novels just because we're finally on the last stretch, essentially. So that's my main bit of excitement, but I'm also excited for some of the other upcoming novels that are due, such as the new Eisenhorn novel that's due to come out shortly.
Yes, the Magos.
With the 600-page limited edition version.
Have you seen we were having a nice look through the limited edition War Master Gaunt's Ghosts thing with all the little logbooks and
the
dog tags and all kinds of stuff. Yeah, really nice.
You certainly get a lot for your money for that one.
Yeah, it is. It's a really nice set, actually. So
it looks so, yeah.
I'm not sure how many they made. I don't think it's too many.
But, in other things in regards to lore, I've recently finished your book Ghost War, and I have quite a few questions I'd like to ask about that.
Before we do, this is your chance, people. This is the spoiler warning. Giant spoiler warning. Tune out now. There will be a timestamp in the description. I had to say that. Remlaze, go.
So, the Patriarch of Cain.
Yeah, I know. That was fun, wasn't it?
Yes. I was like, huh. To put it mildly.
Did that surprise you?
It did surprise me. I did not expect a Gene Stealer Patriarch crossed with an Avatar of Cain.
No, well, to be honest, neither did I when I started writing it, but in all honesty, it's sort of... when I kind of did my synopsis and submitted it to Black Library and stuff, the Gene Stealer cult, it's kind of like... It was an interesting idea... sort of conceit, I suppose, what would a Gene Stealer cult do when it infected a craft world? Or could it even? But then the whole kind of, because I love the whole kind of psychics and mythology side of it and stuff, when I started getting to that point in writing it, I was just thinking, well, yeah, that's obviously what would happen, isn't it? And this kind of weird blend, exactly of the... And also, it took me back, it's kind of a bit of a cheeky nod, I suppose, back to the old days when you could actually have kind of Gene Stealer chaos cults and things like that.
Yeah.
You could have it was the monstrosity that would be a patriarch with a demon sword with a bloodthirster in it, which was horrendous.
Gene Stealer Oracle, wasn't it?
Yeah. So the idea of what part of the craft world would it kind of subsume and stuff, and what would it do to the Eldar was quite interesting, actually.
Because I researched Gene Stealer cults for a video, and it's trying to find out how much they affect other Xenos races was actually really intriguing, because there's so little information on how they affect the Tau, how they affect the Orcs, or to what extent they affect the Orcs. And the Eldar was one that I remember reading and finding very little at the time. So it's good to see it fleshed out, even if I don't know as much as Remlaze does.
Yeah, I mean, the point, I kind of had to set it up in a bit that, it was an isolated craft world, so they had some time to do it. And, what with Eldar generations not being the most rapid fire of things, it's a very long game.
Yeah.
And kind of the idea and the upshot of it really was it's a mistake. It's not, they're so long lived and poorly reproducing really, and their psychic potential. So although they're quite nasty, and you've got the weird things like the Patriarch of Cain, actually, as a survival strategy, infecting Eldar is not the best thing for the Gene Stealers to do, really. And again, the Patriarch's kind of part of that is kind of, it's not able to wholly fulfill its role, sort of thing, because the psychic essence of the craft world and the avatar itself can't quite be itself. It's caught between those two worlds.
So obvious. What that makes me think is, by the logic of the Eldar are a bad choice because of their high psychic potential and their long lifespan and poor reproductive yada yada. Humans obviously are a good target because they're easily manipulated psychically. They're not super long-lived, but close enough. And it makes me wonder about the Tau.
Yeah, well, the Tau's interesting. The thing has not really gone too much into the Tau breeding cycle and stuff like that, and I'm not quite sure where the lore ended up after the sort of initial stuff that we made up and didn't really necessarily get into the first codex. So
the only thing I've seen in regards to like Tau lifespan is that an issue of White Dwarf said that they're short-lived, and then the book Xenology had like a Tau Aethera being like 59 years old, and that was about it.
Yeah, and Farsight being 300 was an incredible anomaly only made possible by the Dawnblade. That's about it.
Yeah, that was always supposed to be the point. Yeah, they were never quite, well, I mean, in terms of the galactic norm, who knows what the actual lifespan of humanity is. But yeah, I mean, compared to sort of like present day, they were supposed to be a little bit, and it was supposed to vary slightly by caste. You know, the Fire Warriors are supposed to be burning the candle at both ends kind of thing, slightly shorter lived than, say, the Earth caste, and particularly the Water caste. And then the Ethereals, again, get the mystical get-outs of, well, we live a bit longer because we're special and in charge. But yeah, it was part of their dynamic outlook, I suppose, was that they were a little bit shorter lived, and therefore, you know, they strive a bit harder during their shorter lives, really.
That's a good way of looking at it, and I'm sure if we learn more about Tau Society, the Ethereals will be a very interesting one to look at. Cough Remlays. Yeah, because there was a video very recently about how and why the Ethereals are in the position they're in, and all the ideas about that. And it's the Tau are a fantastic faction for theorists because we know so little that you can basically do what you want. With the Imperium, there's a lot of rules you have to play by. And the Horus Heresy is the same. As more stuff has come out, you've had to play by more and more rules and mold these characters and these ideas to fit what we know. But the Tau, despite the fact that they're now a very well-established race in the canon, they're probably perhaps the least treated race in, bar maybe the Tyranids, in all of canon. Particularly for
Sisters of Battle.
But we know where they came from, at least.
Yeah, the lore behind what makes a Sister of Battle and how a Sister of Battle society, a convent, works. We know it. We know how.
That's a touchy subject because we don't even know how they get their armor on.
Oh, do you mean whether they use it like they need assistance, like the Space Marines and things, or whether they can just put it on, or
how it interacts with them?
Yeah, well, I suppose the idea is always, it's the non-black carapace armor, isn't it? Same with Inquisitors and things like that. Is there a fundamental difference between Space Marine power armor and everybody else's? And is it possible to put a black carapace into somebody who isn't a Space Marine?
Oh, that's going to open a whole can of worms.
There's many cans of worms. And it's actually, I found out very recently that the Grey Knights basically have it's not a second black carapace, but they have what I affectionately refer to as the Silver Carapace, which is basically a series of silver wards that are etched under their skin as demonic protection. And I found that really intriguing that was a thing.
Is that not the Aegis field?
It might be the Aegis, however it's pronounced. But it was just, I found it really interesting to know that I didn't know that's what it was. I thought the Aegis came with the armor rather than the actual genetics.
I'm probably wrong here, but the Aegis field was originally part of the armor in one of the older Grey Knight codexes, and then they just changed it to a separate thing that's also added into the suit, but it's not part of the suit or something like that. It's confusing.
Yeah.
But talking about books and that, when are we going to get a novel about Ghazghkull Thraka's origins? Because I'd like to see that in detail, as I keep telling you on Twitter.
Oh, Ghazghkull.
Well, nothing planned at the moment, I'd have to say. It came up in one of the seminars we did, actually. One of the panels at the weekend was sort of writing the alien, as it were. And Clint Werner actually saying he would like to maybe tackle a full-length Orc novel at some point. Reckons it'd be possible to do it now. So who knows? I don't know if that'd necessarily be the origins of Gazgul. But yeah, I think it's certainly a much more likely proposition than it was a few years ago.
Because I think as well as people write the Space Marines and people write the Imperial Guard, one cannot deny that it is Imperial overload out of Black Library sometimes, which is fine. But when you're someone who's as into the lore as people like us are, you want to know everything. And when you only know everything about one faction, that's just not enough, if you get my way.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of the reasons I did although there had been a couple of books really about non-Imperial stuff earlier, it's why I wanted to do the Path of the Eldar, just to show that we can, or that the Black Library could sell non-Imperial viewpoint books. And definitely, it's like all sorts of stuff coming out now, not just other Eldar, but, Tau books, some very good G-Seal occult books, which obviously are sort of within the Imperium, I suppose, but from a different point of view.
Agreed.
But then again, it's like it has to be tempered with the harsh reality of sales figures as well.
And that was actually a debate that we were having last time on the podcast slightly regarding the Christmas releases of the Blood Angels and the Dark Angels, and why it was those factions and not Xenos factions or Chaos factions at that time. And it is... You are right about playing to sales as opposed to, or as well as playing to the community and what the community wants and needs. It's a different challenge.
Well, also you have to bear in mind what the community says it wants in terms of what you see on forums or have discussion doesn't necessarily match what people actually buy, because there's still large numbers of people that go out and play this game who don't talk about it on forums, who aren't part of that internet community. They might be part of a smaller community or a club and stuff. So you always have to take your evidence with a slight pinch of salt, because as much as everyone, you can, for all of all the people that say they've never played Ultramarines or whatever it might be on the forums and stuff they frequent, that there's probably 30, 40, 50 people for each one of them who does, So as much, and what you see is usually, it's kind of, it's like everything on the internet, really. You've got to be careful of the tip of the iceberg effect, where the three vocal people doesn't signify the 3 million. It's like, no, actually, the 3 people that care about this are the same ones that are all on the same forum, sort of thing. But yeah, it's I think it's you can disappear down that rabbit hole a bit too far, and just there was you can get to a place where, well, make more Space Marines doesn't work anymore, because it is the variety and their adversaries and the context of everything. You can't just keep releasing Space Marines either as books or armies and things, because although they are a large part of the appeal and a large part of the sales, they're not 100% of it. So
agreed. Speaking of Ultramarines, what was that Thanksgiving poster all about?
Oh, I have no idea. They just, that's kind of, I think because it's the artist that does quite a few of the regimental standard posters and things like that. So I think it was just it's new GW. They're fun. They do fun things.
Oh, no,
they might poke fun at themselves, which is unheard of, obviously.
But does this mean that Ivrain and Gilliman's shipping is canon?
Well, it always was, wasn't it?
You heard it here first.
No, I'm sure Gilliman. Yeah, I think probably had other things on his mind. And Ivrain is, she's dead, really, and still moving around. It's all a bit weird.
Ivrain is the biggest plot device I have ever seen. I mean, no offense to Ivrain, but she is a walking plot hole half the time with what she can just do.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I found, one of the things I did in Ghost Warrior was have to kind of slightly remove some of that ability from her with the situation. And I'm writing Wild Rider, the second one at the moment, actually, and where they're taking on the Necrons. So you've got Inari and Craftworld Elder versus Necrons. Nice. And it's a similar situation. It kind of suggested itself. It wasn't necessarily plot driven, but more background driven, that, obviously the Necrons are quite good at suppressing the warp and things like that, but that would have an effect on Ivrain and the Whisper and her powers and stuff. So it's one of those interesting things where I keep obviously taking her powers away from her, but not necessarily intentionally, but it kind of, it does make her a bit more interesting that way.
I will say this, the one bit that almost made me mad in Ghost Warrior when you ended that chapter and you implied that the Gyrings died, and I was like, no, don't you dare kill off the
Oh, right. Yes. Yeah, Space Cat. Yeah, well, that was it. I mean, it was supposed to, trying to end it on a good cliffhanger. Yeah, I really enjoyed those bits, actually, writing from the point of view of the Gyrings, and then a ridiculous Tom Bombadil reference as well.
Yes.
Sorry, you were saying?
Michael?
Ram? No, you were going to say something.
Was I?
I thought you were.
My turn.
Oh.
Go.
I called dibs. Gav, I've been wondering this question for a bit. After reading, it wasn't Shroud of Night, the one with the Eldari.
Eye of Night?
Right.
Eye of Night.
Yes, yeah, or Hand of Darkness was the other one, isn't it? Yeah.
Yep. Are there any Imperials still with the Eldar at this current moment?
I think sort of like the way I've portrayed it is it's an alliance of occasional overlap, really. That there's a sort of an entente between certain members of the Inari and the Eldari and certain members of the Imperium, but it's the galaxy is a big place, so in places obviously just the age-old enmities are still there. It's not, neither of these factions can speak as one, so I think it's more a case of in some places, there'll be individuals fighting alongside it, with particularly involved Imperial forces alongside Eldari forces. But there's no, I don't think there's like I think it's more that's been added as an option as opposed to it replaces what came before. Which is like
there's nothing on paper.
No, exactly. Well, and so there might be a bit of a spreading, like a more prevalent, the enemy of our enemy is our friend kind of thing, because just everyone's just getting screwed by chaos at the moment. So there's less time for literally less time to be fighting each other. But I don't think it's anything principled any more than the Eldar used to use humanity as a shield, and humans sometimes would end up fighting alongside Eldari anyway. But once you start getting sort of like Guilliman or Eldrad or Ivrain or some of the slightly more movers and shakers involved, then I think there's a little bit more of a more continuing alliance, I would say, a sharing of the burden. The thing I think of it is like, again, a Lord of the Rings reference really, where the elves sort of like send forces to help humanity at the end, sort of thing, even though it's not really their fight. Or so although the Eldari kind of nominally are allied with certain members of the Imperium, I think from their point of view they still see it as using the dumb meat shields to do a lot of the fighting for them.
As you do.
Oh, and then one more question. So is the ship between Guilliman and Ivrain canon?
We already covered this.
Yeah, I was going to say, well, if
damn it, I was with the customer.
Oh, sorry.
I said, well, clearly it is, but no, I mean, Guilliman, I'm sure, not sure where his thoughts are on those things in general, and Ivrain is essentially the animated dead from another species, so it would be, that's quite a kink, really.
To be fair, they were both dead.
Yeah, exactly, they do have that in common, it's true. In fact, they can start a little party really with Iriel.
Why the hell am I justifying this? I've been anti this from day one.
Michael, next you'll be saying Rabute is going for the booty.
Oh, shove off and fall into a warp portal.
Yo, that booty kill a man.
Anyway.
The thing is, the Gyrings is really jealous and doesn't let them do anything, so it keeps interrupting and jumping in.
Why are you buying into this?
Scratching at the legs, that sort of stuff. It's a cat after all, so whatever's the most annoying thing it will find it can do.
Wow.
So at least nobody shipped the cat. Anyway.
Yeah, we're moving on now.
Well, now you've said that, someone's going to in the comments, you know that.
Oh, somebody would have done already, I'm sure.
They'll be shipping with a feeling it.
Yeah.
Are they still canon?
Well, I don't think. Again, there's a bigger discussion about the use of canon, but unless it had deliberately been written out, then everything's still around.
Yeah,
in some form or another.
Yeah, such as Necron Pariahs, for example. I miss Necron Pariahs. Necron Pariahs were fun.
Yes, yeah. I mean, decisions made after I wasn't there, so I can't comment particularly on the whys of that. But
yeah, fair enough. That's fair enough. It's always the one where you think of something that got written out of canon. It's the modern age equivalent to the squats in a way.
A lot, yeah. Sometimes, I mean, it can vary. I mean, again, it's hard to say one rule fits all, really, in terms of why something was dropped or left out, whether it was a particular change in the background or a design decision, like part of the imagery or whatever. I mean, but sometimes it's like, well, even though something's not been mentioned for a long, long time, doesn't mean it's actually been dropped. It's just there's been no reason to mention it.
Yeah, fair enough.
I actually remember seeing an example of that in the new Death Guard Codex, where they mentioned Foulspawn for the first time since 2nd edition.
Right, yeah.
Except he's no longer a demon prince, he's just a Chaos Spawn now.
All right, well, maybe he'll become one soon.
Fair play. Is there anything in the news that I've missed? Anything out of Forge World? Actually, they've got some new Legion doors come out today, I think, for your vehicles, but I can't think of anything that I've missed. Oh. Sly and Marbo's back.
Insert the comment.
You cannot say that with that little enthusiasm.
I can, and I did, but I'll let you do it properly in that case.
I'm not doing it, I'm at work.
I rest my case.
The comment section will just be filled with TTS references now,
True. That's the one thing that you cannot... I think in this community there are probably about 4 inevitables now. Death, taxes, TTS memes, and... Yeah, I can't...
People commenting cyberdongs on my videos.
TTS memes.
It's still inevitable.
Yes.
For shipping me with Magnus. They can stop that.
Oh dear. Yeah, sorry.
Well, unless someone, decides to make it canon. I don't know.
Please, no. God, no. Please, God, no.
It was worth
If they did, I'm going to be all over it.
As in, all over its funeral pyre, getting rid of it.
That too.
Yeah. I think that's just about everything news related, unless anyone's got anything that I might have missed.
Not that I can think of.
Nope.
Okay, then. Well, in what might be the most normal question and answer session we ever do, let us begin the questions.
Okay, then. So, question 1. The Radiant King, a high-ranking Slaanesh champion in 40k, is a Tzeentch title in Fantasy and AOS. Why?
I've never heard of the Radiant King in AOS. I'm not an expert, but...
Okay.
I'm sorry, I don't know AOS lore well enough to answer that, and particularly because Slaanesh has been so not fleshed out in AOS. Slaanesh has gone walkabout, and we know so little about Slaanesh right now. I heard whispering while I was at my local store about something involving Slaanesh next year, but not enough to make a comment on it.
I suspect it's just a case of sort of parallel evolution in that somebody thought it was a cool name and didn't realise it had been used by somebody else, which happens occasionally. There isn't a huge data, so unless you haven't remember that particular thing, it's not like a huge book or database with every single thing ever made up. So when you get a cool title like the Radiant King, somebody thinks that might be a bit Slaaneshy, and then another writer thinks that might be a bit Tzeentchy.
Yeah. Actually, I had someone tell me that while I was doing a video on demons, and they said to me, why are Slaanesh demons called Keepers of Secrets? Surely that should apply to Tzeentch, right? Or something like that. And it was interesting having the debate about why Keepers of Secrets became the Slaaneshi name when the Keepers of Secrets themselves are literally Slaanesh's ultimate expression of mass murder rather than secrecy. They are Slanesh's brute force machine used when there is no alternate left. It's just
but they're also made by people who have kept nothing but secrets and deceit.
They know your innermost desires, that's the thing. So, they might not keep them secret when they talk to you and tempt you. But that's the idea. It's not, there's a difference between sort of like your ambition that Tzeentch will manipulate. Of course, it gets very confusing, of course, because then you've got sort of all sorts of secrets titles in the Dark Angels as well. The Sword of Secrets, it's kept by a keeper of secrets now.
Trust me, there are so many I think the Dark Angels are probably the best source of rumor and theory in the Space Marines, bar none.
Yeah, but I didn't say that Azrael was a keeper of secrets. That's not what I said.
And now someone's got a crazy idea.
Yeah.
Insert Dark Angels are traitors memes in the comment section below.
Ding.
This is actually quite an interesting one. What is the music in the Imperium like? Is there still rap, rock, and etc., or is it all church choir?
I sort of think of it as it fits the theme. It's very gothic in style. So it's not quite church choir, but it's very archaic and old school. Whereas most people associate 40k and the Imperium with metal.
But then wasn't there like a Caiaphas Cain novel where he was like listening to smooth jazz?
Well, again, this comes down to what your impression or particular take is on the idea of an imperial popular culture, really. And of course, going back to sort of source material, like in terms of historical source material, 40k source material, you're looking, it's going to be, even if it's not kind of full orchestral choral stuff, you're more like folk music, and there's definitely stuff like that, because I remember Rick wrote a nice little ditty for Imperial Guard marching songs and stuff like that. So there's definitely, I think, it's not just, there's various types of medieval music of all sorts, from stuff that was done for kings and emperors and stuff that was of the people. So, but also, there's Gothic rockers. So obviously percussion exists.
True.
So yeah, somebody, I don't know, 'cause you have to think of like the cultural things that generated them. So you go, well, heavy metal, for instance, kind of originated out of the industrial cities of the Midlands, in the UK anyway. So you go, well, actually, is there a kind of like a hive city metal that's kind of, or based upon that kind of sound?
Yeah, and then you have the Goth Rockers miniatures, which just played off of that.
Yeah, exactly. So you got to think, again, there's got to be some kind of sort of, I suppose it's just whether there's any kind of the rebellious element that, music that doesn't
Conform.
Yeah, exactly. That's not necessarily smiled upon, is it?
Plus, but to be fair, you have to consider we're on a galactic scale. Everything this is the beauty of the 40k setting. Anything and everything is within the laws of science possible. If you want to create a character that is so different, well, just look at Caiaphas Cain. He is the least commissar-like commissar you've ever seen, and everybody loves him. Same with Gaunt. He doesn't quite follow the conventions of what a commissar is, and yet he's incredibly popular. You don't have to fit the normal to exist in the 40k universe.
I've just now got this mental image of a band from Necromunda touring the galaxy on a small ship, travelling from world to world, playing concerts.
Well, see, because that's the tricky bit, of course, is the travelling from world to world is really hard. So everything is localised. Getting off-world is the hardest thing anyone in 40k can do. And then getting to another world intact is the second hardest thing anyone in 40k can do. So, because it's kind of that kind of personal agency, I think people have to remember all the time, does not exist. Even, it's like you can you stay away? I don't know. It depends how easy it is to get, 'cause ships don't land necessarily. So, that a lot of that kind of story and narrative, you have to be a bit more canny about how you do it. But, if it was decided that, for the benefit of Imperial propaganda that these rock band visited your. I'm trying to think
the Ultramar tour.
Yeah, well, visiting the forces on the front line and entertaining the troops, but in a the Emperor loves you, sell your lives dearly in his honor, of thing.
It's like a Christian rock band, but it's like Emperor rock.
Yeah.
The only thing I can think of, the only thing that I'm thinking of right now, is that scene from Fulgrim when they go to the concert hall.
Oh, yeah.
Where it's like metal opera, and it's like the coolest thing in the world.
And then a whole bunch of people's ears start bleeding, and their heads explode, and demons start being summoned, and everyone starts dying, and then the cacophony are created.
I know, it's so great.
So that's why every concert is one of the best.
Well, yeah, exactly. Okay.
I mean, you wouldn't go to those kind of concerts? That's my jam.
I've been to those kind of concerts.
I know, they're terrific.
Right, next question. What made the Iron Warriors, Word Bearers, etc. so special, since their legions were the only ones that didn't splinter after they entered the Eye of Terror?
The Word Bearers were pretty much, they just went with Lorgar and are now held together by they're sort of a ruling council under Lorgar, because Erebus and Corfarian are constantly trying to depose each other from it, and constantly engaged in a power struggle. The legions have splintered into warbands, but they're a lot more organized than, say, the World Eaters and Emperor's Children. I think is probably a good way of looking at it. It's not like the entirety of the Iron Warriors are on Medrungrad. The entirety of the Word Bearers are on Sikaris. They're not. They're still around, and they probably do communicate or answer to home, but they're not organized like they once were, because Chaos does that.
Well, yeah, exactly. I would say, I'm not sure where, obviously large chunks of those legions might have survived slightly intact, but they've definitely, Chaos is all about, with the exception of the Black Legion, which is welded together by the personality of Abaddon himself and his aims, Chaos is all about serving your goals, and actually as soon as your goals isn't about overthrowing the Imperium but about serving yourself in some other fashion, then actually the machinations of the larger legions become unimportant. So even if you're nominally a word bearer, you might stop paying attention. Basically you're off ravaging planets or building your own shrines or getting possessed or whatever it is, on your own time, for your own benefit, because inherently the traitor Space Marines have given up vows of obedience and vows of loyalty to further their own end. So it's a strange mixture of kind of power and threat and loyalty and habit that keeps them together, and not much else.
I mean, old habits die hard, but 10,000 years of being pretty much given free rein to go and wreck everything in the universe means you're probably not going to answer so quickly when Father comes calling, particularly when said Father has been sat in a temple for 10,000 years. Cough, Lorgar.
Or Fulgrim.
Well, at least Fulgrim's done something.
Let's be honest, the only hope the Emperor's Children had to be somewhat stable was with Fabius Bile, and then Fulgrim decided to put a bounty on his head.
Well, it's interesting because it's one of the things Josh was talking about at the weekender, which is because Fabius isn't bothered anymore. I say he's just a grumpy old man, but get off my lawn, as Josh keeps saying. But also, he's not really worried about overthrowing the Imperium stuff. He's just trying to build a better human, in various ways, and all of these wars and things just keep breaking out and interfering with his grand works. So.
Go on, finish point, sorry.
Because one of the pivotal moments really was the second edition Codex Chaos, where Fabius Bile and Khan and people were introduced into the background. And I remember at the time, the fundamental point of that was it's about mortal ambitions. It's about those characters trying to use chaos for their own ends, and the focus of the story being on the champions, not the gods. And that's kind of still where it's at.
I find it funny you use the get off my lawn line for Fabius, because what Fabius is doing in the book that Josh is referring to is invading Trazyn the Infinite Swarm.
Well, yeah, that's true. He is a bit older than Fabius even.
Grumpy old man fight.
Yeah, I have to wonder, like, what the hell is Fabius going to find on Solemnace? Because there's literally, I think everything in its mother is on Solemnace.
Well, at least it's not as bad as Armin's hopeless attempt to take down a black library.
Oh, Ahriman.
Okay, so Gav wrote one of the best lines I've ever read in any book ever referring to a chaos character.
All right, which
And
one was
the line was, as Armin was attacking and everything, they haven't even seen the White Council yet. But Avrain just goes, Armin. Just casually shrugs him off.
Yeah. Ahriman is a character, when I studied Ahriman, even going back to his 30k days, I think this is the beauty of characters like Ahriman, like Fabius, whether you love them or hate them, whether they're a face or a heel, to use certain terminology. Remlace gets that joke.
I get it, don't worry.
Good. However you think of them, you can justify them. Like, Ahriman's desire to create the rubric comes from watching his brother die to the flesh change and being absolutely terrified of it. He was willing to defy and turn on his own gene father. He was so scared of the flesh change and so annoyed at Magnus for failing to stop it. And you can justify Fabius. You said it yourself. He wants to create the perfect human because he watched his legion die to the blight and everything. And admittedly, he kept himself alive by sacrificing someone despite the fact he had the blight, until plot twist he didn't all of a sudden. Don't ask, don't know.
No, he's still got it.
Yeah. Then how is he alive?
He keeps transferring himself into clone bodies.
But he had it pre-Fulgrim. Was he creating clones in the Great Crusade when he had just like 2 years to live?
Maybe. I don't know. He was creating clones during the Horus Heresy, wasn't he? Like, he made about 5 or 6 clones of Ferrus Manus.
True, I'm aware of that. It's just, it seemed to just stop being relevant. It was like Fabius was clinging to life, watching the Legion die, and then Fulgrim turned up, and Fabius went to Fulgrim to tell him about what he'd done, and it's never mentioned again. It's almost like he was just cured out of... we went to Demon Fulgrim, sorry. He went to Demon Fulgrim to tell him, and then it was just never an issue again. I don't know.
Maybe he took some medicine, I don't know.
Demon did it and ran away.
That was pretty much the warp did it was the only answer I could come up with.
It covers so much in 40k.
Yeah, it definitely does.
Okay, next question. What does Xenos music sound like? Well, I remember from the Codex Imperialis from 2nd edition, the Bill King story, Kelmon, where there's like a psycho harp. So I know Eldar have psycho harps. Actually, that's the point. Is Kelmon from the Bill King story the same as Wraithseer Kelmon in Ghost Warrior?
Yes.
Hey.
That was the idea, yeah. A bit of a nod back to that.
I thought it was.
Yes.
I was like, I don't know that name.
And we're not discussing this because I've already put the spoiler timestamp in. Just warning, because otherwise people are going to have to miss half the podcast.
Well, he's not important. If someone is like, it's a name.
Yeah, I say the spoiler timestamp went a long time ago. It's just I don't want you to go back into spoilers now. That was all. Sorry.
Okie doke.
So, do the Tau have any music? And someone asked if it sounds like Korean pop music.
I was thinking more sort of, yeah, yeah, or more kind of. I was thinking more kind of that industrial propaganda, sort of like Iron Curtain style, sort of rousing speech. You know, sort of like Hunt for Red October, where they're all singing together.
Yeah, because
kind of stuff.
Yeah, because the Tau project themselves as this forward-thinking, and like people do associate them with sort of what's the word Alexis loves to use? Gundams and like anime and stuff. But yet, when you
they're
actually look
from
at
anime and mangoes.
Yes, people just assume that their music is like that, and yet if you actually look at their society, it's not quite communism, but it's close. So it's an interesting paradox.
Space communism.
Space commies. Yeah, space commie fish camels.
Camels?
Camels. They're supposed to be
They have
camelid.
hoofed feet.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. But again, you have to think, well, who makes it? Who makes the music and why? Because it's like, well, did the Firecast obviously have like, I'm trying to think if there's anything in the Fire Warrior game, but so who would sing, who would make music, and for what reason? Because it's like, music has cultural value, so that's why it's, and whether it's sophisticated or primitive and stuff will depend on the society that creates it. But so you think actually the town probably have quite a sophisticated, they've got quite a sophisticated social scheme, as it were, even if it's very well managed. So maybe it's maybe Watercast, maybe it's a sort of a control mechanism from the Watercast and things. I don't know.
Yes, Tau civilian law, please. This will answer so many questions. Yes, anyway, that's pet desire of mine. I want to know how Tau society works badly.
All of it.
I want to know how the sisters get recruited and actually go through their entire lifestyle without just dying.
Schola Progenia.
Yeah, but it doesn't go into detail on their armor or where it comes from.
I know who designed it. It was a Vandar design.
Yeah, it was designed by him, but what planet makes it?
The local Forge world? To the convent, perhaps?
Maybe a convent, because the Sisters of Battle hate the Mechanicum.
Oh yeah, different god.
Yeah, I'm not sure where that came from, to be honest. I think the idea was originally that because they're servants, because they have the same god really, because they have the Omnissiah and the Emperor, even though they're different interpretations. So in the same way that they had the biggest trouble was more with the Space Marines, who wouldn't think the Emperor was a god at all. But yeah, the idea I think was like, because it's via the Ecclesiarchy itself, which has got all kinds of pacts with the Mechanicum and things, because it's they're all arrangements of convenience, like most things, where you go, well, we'll happily forget the fact that you don't actually believe in quite the same god that we do, as long as you give us more of your guns.
Yeah, and the entire Mechanicum civil war came about on, is the Emperor the Omnissiah? That was pretty much the dividing line for Kelbor Hal, because he didn't see the Emperor that way, despite what the Emperor could do.
Well, he obviously worshipped the Void Dragon, didn't he?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Are there any examples of children doing badass things in 40k?
Yes. I've forgotten their names right now, but there's a pair of Alpha Class Psyker twins.
The Apex Twins.
That's the one. The Apex Twins. Thank you. Who were so badass that they slaughtered an entire Black Ship's crew, which presumably includes Sisters of Silence.
Yeah. You'd think so. Maybe an Inquisitor or two as well. There's a scene in Asumen that I did, which has an Eldar. Well, one of the main characters, basically, she's got her son or daughter, I think, with her for most of the story, and their battleship, that ship gets boarded by humans and things, and the baby, which hasn't actually learned to fetter its psychic potential, does some stuff.
And actually, speaking of a sermon, or Asiaman, or however his official pronunciation is, Jane Zar. Because Jane Zar was sort of, I forget her old name, Faydet something, I forget.
Oh yeah, Feruthir or something.
Something like that, yes. But when a sermon came out of the temple where he'd been camped out since the fall and went ham on some Dark Eldar like a beast, Jane Zar comes across as a very inexperienced, almost a youth, who then goes on to become this Phoenix Lord of ultimate badassery. So you could say, in a way, because Jane Zar, actually after a sermon went ham, she kind of had a red mist moment, and she just went psycho, if I remember it right. And it was, she pled with the sermon, please temper this, train me, so as this doesn't happen again. I could be remembering it's wrong. It's like a year since I looked into the Phoenix Lords, but that counts. I think that counts.
Sort of, yeah. I mean, when you read the events as portrayed in Jane Zar, she's not quite as naive and as young, I suspect, as maybe she appears to Asumen. she's got a little bit more, quite a bit more experience.
She was a former pit fighter, wasn't she?
Yeah, she was basically a proto-witch. But the reason she's kind of gone completely feral by the point she meets him, so she has very much regressed to her less controllable roots, as it were. Not that she had them much as a witch either. Trying to think of any other kids. Well, I don't know. It depends how many. There's the three main characters in Ian Watson Space Marine at the start when they're recruited.
That novel's classic.
And various other scouts and neophytes.
Yeah, you've got Ragnar in his initial story, but he was a youth before he was recruited by the wolves. That technically counts. Basically, any Space Marine origin story counts because you have to do something to get noticed.
Yes.
I wouldn't necessarily say it was badass, but I did like how Lorgar was portrayed in his youth in the Bearer of the Word novel.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, getting beaten. Got it.
It's not just that, but I liked how naive he was, essentially. Like, and well done for making Corferon even more of an unlikable prick.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. People have said that. There's a few people who said, "Oh, I used to really hate Erebus. Now I really hate Corferon as well."
If you read the Heresy, I think everybody hates Erebus. Erebus is the bad guy in the Heresy. If there is a bad guy, it's Erebus.
He killed Argyle.
I don't know. My money still goes to Magnus, who literally destroyed the entire Imperium's future.
By accident.
And then didn't give his message.
Yeah, Magnus stuffed that up. I'll admit that.
He was a bit flustered.
Yeah. It's like, this is a bad time, I'll come back later.
There's also, I'd say most of the Primarchs probably did something as children. There's a bit in Deliverance Lost, where the infant Korax meets a prison guard for the first time and makes a present of his head for someone.
You've got Angron literally crash landing on Euceria and being by Dark Eldar in about 5 minutes and killing them all in about 5 minutes, which is pretty damn impressive considering he just crashed.
Yeah. We don't know what the lion got up to, but he probably killed a few Chaos Beasts.
First man from the Asimov as well, that's another one.
Yeah, Manus. Russ, well, we know what he was doing when he was young. He was literally living with wolves. Who else was there? Dawn was kind of Dawnish, which is to say pretty straight-edged and forgettable half the time.
Mortarion.
Adornable.
Yeah, adornable. Mortarion, sort of like basically surviving a hell world.
Yeah, he was sort of cooped up in way too high in the fog for his own good.
Yes, and having a strange, otherworldly alien as a dad probably wasn't the coolest thing.
It definitely was Xenos in origin, not anything more malevolent. It was definitely Xenos.
Well, I think that's supposed to be Chaos Worship in Xenos, aren't they? The idea that, from what I recall, although I may be wrong, the idea that it's not humanity doesn't have an exclusive on worshipping chaos. I mean, Dan did that quite well in some of his books, Gaunts and Eisenhorn and stuff.
I mean, just look at the lair.
Yeah, exactly.
Very
my favorite race.
And then you had Kurz, who was basically Batman.
Yeah.
Sorry, did he start out as Batmite though? That's the thing. Sorry, carry on.
Batman crossed with Jack the Ripper.
Pretty much.
No, he's Batman mixed with the Carnage symbiote.
Yeah, I can see that.
Am I the only one?
I get what you meant, but I don't know Marvel that well.
Or DC, for that matter.
Oops.
I do.
Oops. Shut up, Michael.
Okay. This question's mostly for Alexis, but curious to hear everyone's thoughts on this. I know they probably never will, but if they were to ever make rules for Miriel Sabathiel and Chaos Corrupted Sisters, what unique things would you want them to have?
The ability to always go first in combat, similar to the Slaaneshi stuff, something similar to Acts of Faith, but more corrupted.
I'd agree to that.
And possibly some differing war gear, like maybe like sound pistols and things like that, because she's the very upper echelons of Slaaneshi's worship, so she has access to all of that. Seeing Sisters of Battle on steeds would be kind of cool, like they're on Seekers of Slaanesh.
Yeah.
They could do a lot with corrupted Sisters of Battle.
I mean, that's only speaking of Slaanesh corrupted sisters. I mean, some of the orders...
Mariel Sabathiel is Slaanesh.
Yes, Sabathiel, yes, but if we talk more broadly about Chaos Sisters as a concept, it would be interesting to see whether sisters would ever become psychers, because obviously they are the Ordo Heretic, part of the Ordo Heretic, technically part of the Ordo Hereticus. They deal in dealing with the witch and the heretic.
There is actually nothing really in the lore for stopping them from becoming psychers, like latent psychers.
It'd just be interesting to see them actually embrace, in a very Mortarian-esque way, embrace what they once reviled.
Yeah, I'd like that. Yeah, Ephrael Stern also needs a model.
Well, one that isn't a Black Library exclusive.
I'd still buy it.
Yeah. God, I miss it when Black Library used to do the exclusive models. Back in the late 90s.
I bet if you look, it was probably more recent than that, scarily. I'm not sure, because I mean, Black Library didn't start until 1997, so...
That's true. Like the first model that came out with it was the Cal Jericho one, and then it was Captain Leonatos.
Yeah. And there was I can't remember. Yeah, they did a few in the end, didn't they? I think it was about 6.
Yeah. That's a point. Is there any chance in the future of Black Library republishing Blood Quest in hardback, like what you've done with Demonifuge and Titan and Redeemer recently?
Yeah, I suppose all things are possible. I don't know whether whether they've got any plans to do it, but send them an email and ask for it. Generally, it's like, obviously not necessarily one email, but if there seems to be, if the editors or whoever kind of get communications that seem to express a desire, then they can at least raise it with the sales guys and marketing and say, "Oh, is it worth doing this?" Because it's not just anecdotal. Then they can say, "Well, actually, we've had quite a few people asking about Blood Quest returning or whatever." So there you go. Start an online. No, don't start an online petition. But for anything kind of particularly Black Library related or whatever, or even Games Workshop. I mean, obviously, like I say, one person doesn't necessarily swing a vote, as it were, but actually just expressing. Being able to kind of express what you might like to see, rather than just simply voting with what's with your wallet on what's already out there, can help people sort of like decision makers see what might be worth doing in the future or bringing back.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
Okay, next question. How do the different Eldar forces and craft worlds intergalactically or astropathically, you might say, communicate with one another? They
don't, pretty much. If I remember it correctly, there was, at times, alliances between them. So I think it was Bieltan and Saimhan had a pretty close alliance at one point, but the two just sort of drifted apart because of different ideologies. So I suppose they probably just keep up if they're close enough, or having a run into each other on the webway equivalent of the motorway.
Well, don't they just transfer their mind across space, essentially, like with what Ayana did from Eanden to Ulfway?
Well, that's kind of partly it. Basically, the webway, it's not just you've got to remember it's kind of an analog for warp travel, really, in the same way that astropaths can project across the raw warp, and it's terrible, and your message turns up 2 million years later or whatever, and it drives you insane. The webway is a more efficient way of doing that. It's not necessarily instantaneous or easy, but actually it's a psychic conduit so that that you can communicate across. But it does require a considerable amount of power. I think, and obviously the more you use it, you still have the issue of potentially attracting demons and things like that. So yeah, the webway is kind of the infrastructure. I don't know whether they want to use in the same way that craft worlds can theoretically enter the webway, but it's not necessarily a great idea for them to do it. As the craft worlds have evolved to a point of self-sufficiency, or at least to the point of post-scarcity self-sufficiency, that they don't really need to communicate with each other unless sort of like farseers are sending each other's warnings and stuff like that. So, which you can imagine there's a bit more of that going on. But yeah, I mean, again, on a day-to-day kind of like your average Eldar chapess, as it were, in the street, they don't really need to talk to somebody from a craft world, which is potentially 60,000 light years away. So,
fair point.
Okay. Could there be such a thing as an orc perpetual?
Please, God, no.
It depends if we knew exactly what perpetuals were.
I think the closest thing we got.
I would just say no.
I think the closest one we got is Tusker, who keeps getting resurrected every day by Khorne, but that's about it.
Yeah.
Actually, they continued that story a little bit more, and now he's just fighting in the Brass Citadel.
Oh, he got a promotion, did he?
He fights bloodthirsters, so I'm wondering how big he is.
Probably not that big, because he gets killed and resurrected every day.
No, that part of the story is, like, over.
Oh.
Wait, so Khorne broke him out of the live, die, repeat loop?
He's now one of the fighters in the Citadel.
Huh.
Khorne obviously twigged that if he stayed alive and kept getting bigger and bigger, he got more and more entertaining.
Then one day,
Yeah,
there's a big red version
imagine
of the beast coming out of the warp.
No, like, imagine an orc the size of the beast, but blood god.
That'd be hilarious.
Yeah.
I think that's called Gork, isn't it?
Would that make Morg Zinch then?
I think they're both the same. Is that the whole kind of brutal kind of is a thin slice between them that only orcs would ever recognise. Everyone else is just like, no, it's just a big smash wild god.
Yeah, actually, speaking of the orcs and Gork and Mork and stuff, I was looking into and thinking about the War energy, the War field, whatever you want to call it, because it's not the warp. They seem to make it semi-clear. It seems implied that the War energy is not. It might be an analog form, but it is not warp energy. And yet it's affected by the shadow in the warp. It's obviously a psychic thing because the shadow in the warp affects it, but the shadow in the warp is in the warp. So is War energy just warp energy with an orc twist on it, or is it something else entirely? I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's supposed to be, because it's again, you have to sort of like wind the clock back to sort of like why the orcs were created and to fight sort of like in a period when Eldar and Necrontyr and stuff were around and stuff. So they're a kind of slightly different take on the psychic species idea, or not psychic species. So I think, and again, you've got to also bear in mind that they are not properly functioning. So we never, like warp heads and weird boys were not obviously what was actually intended. So they generate a psychic field, which is what weird boys tap into, and what kind of can affect. It kind of affects each other, gives them their wildness, I suppose. But whether that's, it could be, I suppose, whether they're directly siphoning that from the warp and then generating it, I don't think is the case. But perhaps, I suppose, maybe they do need they've got a nascent warp connection that allows them to project it, which if it's stopped by the shadow in the warp or something stops them, every living creature is supposed to have like its little reflection in the warp and stuff. You could say that maybe like the orcs are able to project that back into the the real universe or something unconsciously. Something like that maybe.
That's definitely an interesting way of putting it, because obviously it does affect reality far more than even the warp does, because the warp affects reality when a psyker makes it happen, or when there's a warp rift somewhere. Basically, if there's a conduit for it, the orcs just happens all the time, and it's a concentrated thing. So it's obviously in the same manner, or it's kind of like in the manner of a psychic choir. When it comes together, it is far more powerful. So a large number of orcs being together allows the warp field to become much more powerful and to be tapped into. So yeah, maybe it is just re-reflecting the warp back into the energy with a...
Yes, there's obviously something about it, or at least something inherent in their nature, which is the way they were created, which makes them resistant to that power. It doesn't physically corrupt them. They're not, and they're so unsophisticated in many ways that they're not, spiritually corrupted by it, obviously. So in the same way that Eldar use runes and, you've got the soul binding of the astropaths and things like that, it's a safer way, I suppose, of accessing warp power through orkiness.
Indeed.
Okay. Could there be such a thing as Imperial Sorcery? Kind of like how the Sisters of Battle are able to perform miracles of faith. Could psychers or non-psychers be able to channel the psychic might or sanctioned power of the Emperor?
Isn't that what the Emperor's Tarot is?
I
have no idea.
Long period of silence.
Well, I didn't know what to say there.
Well, I suppose it comes down to what your personal interpretation of is. Is there generally actually any difference between psychics and sorcery? In the same way, like the Space Wolves insist that what they're doing is not quite the same thing as what the Thousand Suns were doing, and all the rest of it. That may be true in the way they kind of access it and stuff, but it still all comes from the warp. And whether they, I suppose it's whether there could actually ever be anything like a benevolent use of the warp, which we know there is in some respects. In theory, Space Marine librarians and Imperial Psychics and things access warp power and use it for good, and are trained to be not corrupted by it. But it's a very intense and very individual process. So it depends. I know there's quite a bit of stuff in the Fantasy Flight role-playing games and things, really, and obviously a bit more in the heresy background stuff about what sorcery actually is. But at its root, it still all kind of taps into the same place. And that's kind of one of the what-ifs. I think that's a really interesting question, but I don't think there's a definitive answer, because it's like, well, it depends on whether the Emperor actually exists as any kind of warp entity to tap into.
I'm so glad you just said that. I'm so glad you just said that, because I was about to mention the Emperor Chaos God theory and whether you'd even thought about it.
Well, it's supposed to be interesting, and that's kind of part of one of the big what-ifs is like, did he intend to ascend or didn't ascend or partially ascend? Back as far as writing the Sisters of Battle Codex, the second edition Codex and things, I threw that out there because when Sebastian Thor is about to, or is on sort of like building his resistance to Van Dyer, and Van Dyer sends a fleet to crush this upstart movement, and it gets destroyed in a warp storm. And
the storm of the Emperor's Wrath.
Storm of the Emperor's Wrath. But that's a human attachment to it. So did the Emperor reach out and destroy those ships? But, or is it just a case of, it's basically retroactive pattern recognition of like, because if it just as easily if it had destroyed Thor's ships, it'd be known as something completely different. And I don't like there to be a definitive answer to that. I think that's up to individual players and writers and everything else to, just like in real life, to say where's the lines of faith and reality are drawn.
Yeah, and it was interesting reading Dark Imperium and seeing super Imperial Truthy Gilliman have that debate and applying his theorem, conclusion, logic to it, of trying to work out what Dad was doing with the whole God thing.
Yes, yeah, exactly, and how could he, Yeah, well, I think a lot of it comes down to on my wins at the moment. Well, taking on the Imperial Church, that seems to be, has the loyalty of 1 million planets in one way or another. Probably not the best use of my resources at the moment. So there's a good pragmatic streak there as well, which essentially the Emperor did not possess. The Emperor was not willing to risk that, which is why he kind of smacked down the Wordbearer so hard and all the rest of it. But whereas Guilliman is a little bit more. Yes, maybe I'll fight that war later when the real war's been won.
I guess you could say he's a lot more practical.
Yes.
Okay. After the Horus Heresy, were there any major reactions to the remaining Loyalist Primarchs going MIA? Is there a chronology of their disappearances?
In answer to the latter question, sodding no, and I'm sad. We know Guilliman died. He basically died. I think was it in M32 Guilliman died, or was it still M31? I forget.
I think it's probably still M31 because the Heresy was quite early M31.
Yeah.
The Scarron went on for quite a while, but didn't go on. It wasn't a millennia long.
No, not even to the Grey Knights, who thought it went on much longer.
Yeah, because Vulcan reappeared in M32 and then he pooped the beast snoot.
And made reference to Dawn, so Dawn had obviously disappeared. In fact, everyone had gone by this time.
Yeah, that's definitely the assumption or the presumption, I suppose, was that actually the return of Vulcan was something like unexpected, as it were. There's a good chunk of time when the Primarchs had not been around. He had deliberately stepped aside, essentially, and got himself lost, so that the Imperium could carry on without him, but without going full on. I'm disappearing into the warp and never coming back.
Yeah, actually, speaking of coming back, obviously we know the Primarchs are on their way back. We've seen Guilliman, Magnus, Parian, and it follows eventually that we'll see Fulgrim and Angron and others. But that obviously then raises the Loyalist Primarchs. Where are they? Who's alive? Who's not?
Well,
yes. Are there any? Obviously, you don't have the same. You might have more insight as in who you believe is alive / liable to return. Because obviously, I don't know how much. You don't see into the studio anymore. But are there any Primarchs that even before the return of everybody that you would earmark that said, I'd love to bring them back?
Oh, I don't know, because it was generally until they sort of like this current thing. It was just never on the table. It was one of the. It's funny. There were two truths, as it were, that were kind of like hammered into us really when we were in games development stuff, which was like the Primarchs will never return, and we will never make Horus Heresy in 28 mil. But once they started making, once Forge World started making Horus Heresy, I suppose that was all bets off on the second one as well. It wasn't one of those things that was ever, it was never even contemplated when I was in the studio. It just was never going to happen. Even the Demon Primarchs. I think it would depend. For me, the interesting thing is trying to work out what would make the most interesting changes to the storyline, rather than which of the Primarchs would I like to see the most. And that would just depend on how the studio handles it. If the Lion wakes up, for instance, well, that's very different to Rust coming back. And those stories could be treated in many different ways. I think one of the bigger hints has been like Lorgar finally stirring, things like that. So that would be very interesting. A different sort of foil to Guilliman, really, from the ones we've got.
That's a point. When Games Workshop turned around and said to you guys, "Okay, we're going to be bringing Guilliman back," what was your reaction?
I was like, "Oh, really?" Yeah, it was, I suppose, and it. I guess. I mean, I was surprised. Not like utterly shocked, couldn't believe it and stuff. But I was like, "Oh right, okay, we're going that way now, are we? All right, well, that makes some interesting things." And then it's more a case of, well, let's see what the execution is. But which I think's been cool, generally. But that's what it comes down to for the others, the demons and the chaos side stuff. Although you can attach a cool story to it. Notarian and Death Guard are obviously having their day in the sun at the moment, and the others will, I'm sure, come along at some point when there's a focus on that particular power. With the Loyalist ones, I suppose, there's it's harder to hang stuff on it, I suppose, actually, and particularly after the first. In a way, it's like actually all of the Demon Primarchs coming back is kind of cool, and actually not that surprising because they're more or less they've been more active in the lore and all the rest of it. Angron's attacked Armageddon, and we know that Magnus has been, even if you go back to the old Battle of the Fang or whatever, it's like, he was around and they were obviously still doing stuff. Whereas, Guilliman's back. It's just a big thing. Wow, the Loyalist Primarchs can return. It's just then. Is the big thing, but it becomes diminishing returns from then. It's like, okay, Corax comes back, yay, Vulcan comes back, yay, and then you're like, and then it's like, we've got another 7 to get through then. Yeah, and then it gets a bit repetitive. So I don't think they'll be rushing it anytime soon. Okay, but they're big cool models as well. That's the thing. It's like, what can we do that's going to, make a great model that people want to collect and put in their armies.
All right, cards on the table then. Either as a writer or just for sheer fact of assuming executed well, who would you write back in? Just put a name on it.
Who would I write back in? I would love to see. Are we talking Loyalist or Traitor or both? Or
put a name on it. I don't mind which. Loyalist might be more interesting, but put a name on it.
I would like to see. I would really actually. I'd really like to see the return of Russ actually, but that's really bad because he's supposed to return. He's supposed to return for the Wolf time, for the end times. You're like, well, that is the end times. Is it? Is this it? Is this over? This is the last chance of humanity to win or not win.
Russ coming back is sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
Carry on.
But Russ coming back is pointless because if Russ comes back, it's the final battle. The final battle implies the end, which means that if Russ comes back, it's the end. And that means that everybody's dead. So Russ coming back is literally the last thing the Imperium wants right now, if the legends are true.
Well, that literally made that point in Ashes of Prospero at the start. Niall Stormcaller is chatting with Logan Grimnar, and there's a whole kind of because Logan Grimnar's been on a bit of a spirit quest and looked into the warp and seen portents and things, and Logan's like, well, anything else, and essentially. I was like, I don't want to see the wolf returning. Why? Because that means it's all over. So whether that's, whether that's absolutely the case, because of course it's like, again, it's like belief versus reality. It's like, I'll return it. It's not even necessarily got the same weight as the Rana Dandra of the Eldar and stuff like, which is the final battle. It's like, well, I will return it. It's like, it's something he said before he went. It's not like Russ wasn't known for his prophetic skills, really. It's more a case of when you most need me, I will return in a cool kind of way. So, but I could literally see him chasing somebody out. It's like, especially if Magnus has returned and stayed returned.
And with the Rana Dandra, actually, it's sort of been implied with the Harlequins that they've found a way through it, or they think they found a way to survive it. So that might have lost a little weight, the Rana Dandra. Sure, it might be the end of something, but it's not the end of the Eldar anymore if you believe the Harlequins.
Yes, yeah. Well, and also the Inari, again, they think they can kind of short circuit it slightly if they can get Iniad to rise early. So the Harlequins, they're all kind of, the thing about the Harlequins is they think they found a different solution, not the Craftworld lock our souls in prisons, not the
the Dark Eldar don't die policy.
Yeah, exactly. If we just keep drinking, we'll be fine. Never have to be sober. And the Exodites are similar sort of things like, well, we'll just stick our fingers in our ears, say la 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 la, and bury our souls underground. So they think they've got a different way. They think the Laughing God will save them, or individually. Every one of them has been or will be saved by the Laughing God. So, and now the Inari think, no, it's all right. We'll all end up in Iniad, and then. Yeah. So whether any of them are true, you don't find out until it's too late. It's like either as an Eldar or as a species, basically. So the wolf time's in there, though. It's like I will return to the wolf time. It's going to be the final battle. but actually how long that battle lasts and who's on the winning side isn't necessarily declared.
Yeah, fair enough.
Another quick question, actually. It's a slight side question, talking about the Primarchs again. What does Demon Perturabo actually look like? Because he's the only one I've not seen any art for at all.
Interesting, yeah. Probably a really big girder or something, I don't know.
Yeah, I sort of think of like a massive obliterator is sort of how I think of him.
Or a bottle of iron brew. I don't know.
Something ranged, actually, and I think, again, that's one of those tried to do with the Primarchs and the Heresy and stuff as well. It's like, it's all well and good having kind of fancy named spears and swords and stuff, but actually a good heavy bolt or a massive las cannon helps sometimes. I think, yeah, Perturabo, it's hard because, they're all large armored individuals, but you could really push it, I think, with him. Yeah. And again, actually, yeah, he'd be a very interesting return. And again, not necessarily, in lots of people's minds, not necessarily top tier in terms of popularity and stuff, but actually could have a lot broader effect beyond his legion in a way. And I'm sure if anyone would like to have another tilt at Terror, it'd be him.
Just to shove it in Dawn's face.
Yeah, well, exactly. Well, outlasted you. I think he could be a really good one actually to mix things up a bit. I suspect we won't see him very soon because there isn't a Legion miniatures range that would necessarily get attached to him in the same way that Berserkers and all the Slashy stuff would get attached to the return of Fulgrim and Angron. So.
Okay, next question. The penal legions of the Imperial Guard, do they only fight Xenos, and are they kept away from Chaos battlefields because of the risk of them turning?
No, I don't think so. I thought the penal legions just, sent out to, sacrifice yourself for the Emperor for your sins. Yeah, I
thought the penal legion was like the Repentia.
I'm the one penal legion that comes to my mind are the Last Chances, and I don't remember them actually fighting Chaos, but they are still susceptible to it because one of them got possessed and then beat that demon down in order to kill Hermann von Strab.
Yes, yeah. Well, I think, being like the ultimate expendables, the penal legions, actually, they're probably the first ones you're going to send in a way, because they're just basically the cannon fodder of cannon fodder. So even if they accidentally win, you don't mind destroying them again afterwards anyway. Whereas, once quality troops are committed, then, you're going to lose them one way or another, generally, either because they're going to win and then you have to kind of gently shunt them into the void, or they're all going to die horribly anyway. And the thing with the Last Chances, just like during that particular series anyway, they were being kind of like subordinated to an Ordo Xenos Inquisitor at the time. He was the one who was kind of like kept kind of pulling the strings of Schaefer, Inquisitor Oriel. So that's why they end up fighting a lot of aliens, basically. But there is in the background, the Last Chances, there is a mention of they did go into the Eye of Terror once and only 2 of them returned, Schaefer and some hideously burnt person, which may or may not have been, that's like in the old background, but may actually...
If it hasn't been retconned, it's still a thing.
Yeah, well, exactly, but it might be a slightly different thing if I have my way. But that's in the future. That's
a story for another day.
Yeah, well, a novel for another day, in fact.
Definitely.
I think there's nothing. Again, it's this, this idea that just confronting chaos will corrupt you or something. Like, well, no, it's not quite. It's a bit more insidious than that. Especially if you're shooting at it, chaos tends to shoot back. So it's more likely you just be sent in droves. The difficulty will be who would lead them. That's more tricky, I suppose.
True, very true.
Okay. This may sound ridiculous, but hear me out. Is it possible for a Primarch to become the avatar of the Emperor?
That depends on whether you buy into the Emperor being a god.
We just saw a Patriarch turn into an avatar. Sorry, I had to take the shot.
Yeah. But yes, the fact that we can see other species become avatars of a god, all you then need is the Emperor to be a god to have someone be an avatar of.
Yes. I mean, again, does the Emperor exist as a god? Therefore, can somebody channel, is Celestine an avatar of the Emperor? Is any of the living saints? Are you a Thorian Inquisitor? Yes, no. and if you are, then therefore you probably believe that somebody can eventually become an avatar. And actually, you've spent your entire life hunting down potential candidates. Now that Primarchs are back, then that you'd be looking very closely at them, thinking, "Oh, can we imbue the power of the Emperor into one of these?"
Well, I've always wondered that with what Celestine said before, in Gathering Storm, and then again in Shroud of Night, where she has open communication with the Emperor.
Yes, I mean, because of course the analogies to Joan of Arc, sort of like being able to claim to be able to hear God's voice and things like that. So, can she really? I don't know. Again, it's one of those. I think it should always be left up to the interpretation of the player. You can kind of hint that maybe it's true, maybe it's not, but it comes down to that essential: does the Emperor communicate on a one-to-one basis with anyone? Is it possible even without shredding their minds, or is it something else at play that has basically been pattern formed by human belief into she's a living saint, or or the Imperial Tarot is the guidance of the Emperor, and whatever it might be. So
yeah, definitely, and it's the same analogy as with Gazgul. Can he hear Gorka Mork in his head or not?
Yeah, or was there just a bullet rattling around in there?
Both equally likely. The talks.
Any updates on the whereabouts of Commissar Yarrick?
No.
He's right over here.
God damn it, Alexis.
Last
I found him.
Last seen in the Haunted Gulf after Gazgul EMP'd the entire fleet and teleported.
Oh no, he's wicked good at arm wrestling.
He's got a bit of a squint though.
Moving on.
If Tzeentch failed to have Magnus fall to Chaos, would a second option be Lorgar?
I don't think he would go after... I think if Tzeentch were to have failed with Magnus, I don't think taking Lorgar as his own would have actually been a sound strategy. Because if you think about it, if Tzeentch takes Lorgar, then why is Mortarion going to follow... Well, actually, I'll put it another way. If Tzeentch takes Lorgar, and Lorgar turns Horus, and Nurgle takes Mortarion, then why would Mortarion follow Horus, who was turned by Lorgar, who serves Nurgle's arch enemy? I think it was better to keep Lorgar undivided and to try and get a different loyalist, like a Lion, a Sanguinius, than go Alfarius even, if you believe he was going for Chaos at all with the whole Cabal angle. I think it would have been better to go after someone who wasn't so intrinsic to making the whole thing stick, to go after someone who was either on the other side or who wasn't as central as Lorgar was, I would say.
Why don't we just take Lorgar and fire him out of a Nova cannon?
Actually, speaking of the Cabal, there's one thing I do actually want to ask. Because obviously, Horus Heresy took place, M31, if it was, something like that. And
07 to 0012, I think.
And the fall of the Eldar was M30 when the Great Crusade started. How old is Eldrad Ulthran? Was he around during the fall?
Well, depends who you ask. But since I'm here and you're asking me, no. I very deliberately, because Eldrad appears obviously in Jane Czar, and he is very deliberately of the post-fall generation in Jane Czar. It's funny, it's one of those sort of like you write something and then you forget to explain to other people why you wrote it, and then it gets taken literally. So the whole thing that came about really with Eldrad being that old, I mean, he was obviously supposed to be kind of quite ancient and learned as a Farseer, but I then in the 3rd edition Codex, there's a confession from a ranger being tortured, who essentially says, that's the background for Eldrad, and it's basically all this boasting about how cool Eldrad is, and one of the things is like, he tried to warn your emperor, but nothing in there A says that the ranger was telling the truth, or B that Eldrad had to physically be alive at the time, rather than, which what I had in my head is more likely projecting his spirit back in time through some kind of weird Eldar shenanigans to try and warn the emperor. So he wouldn't necessarily have to literally be 10,000 years old, but that's the way it got written in the end, really. But he's kind of first generation post-fall. So in Jane's R, he's a few hundred years old. He's an upstart in Jane's R. He's not even in charge of the council yet and things like that. So, but he's identified as being very powerful. And I kind of set him up a bit as being in the same way that Assyrian and the Phoenix Lords are kind of promulgating this idea of the Eldar path to control the excesses across the craft worlds and things, that Eldrad is instrumental in developing the early rune law, which was kind of based on kind of regimenting lots of the stuff that used to be kind of like the cult of Morai Heg. The Seers used to be kind of priests and priestesses of Morai Heg before the fall. So he kind of took that sort of hedge wizardry, as it were, and turned it into more of a discipline. And again, has kind of like that's kind of spread from him a bit. So he's kind of like the father, as it were, of modern Seerdom.
He wasn't there for the beginning.
But he's not. Yeah, that's the whole point. Is he's not touched. He was, born later.
It's interesting you take the whole he tried to warn your emperor line, because if you do take it, he did try to warn Fulgrim, and then, depending on when this thing with the Ranger happened, we know that in M32, the Harlequin, I don't know whether to call it invasion or raid of the Imperial Palace, was orchestrated by Eldrad. So if you take it literally, yes, he did. Kinda.
Yeah, exactly. I think, it's... I think what could be argued is the portrayal of Eldrad, and actually even back then he shouldn't have been. He's not necessarily head of Ulthway, and there's a tendency sometimes actually when you're writing historically about current characters and stuff to forget that they weren't necessarily who they are now back then. I think there's a little bit of that with Eldrad. Actually, he's just transposed backwards. Rather than being young Eldrad. And I've tried very hard, because he appears in I did an audio called Ashiman the Darker Road as well, which is kind of one of the first times Ashiman kind of meets him. They've met before, but the idea that they're kind of, this is one of their early adventures, really. Which, of course, by this point, is like Ashiman's already like 1,500 years old or something, but Eldrad isn't. So, and similarly with Jane's R. So, kind of like the young Eldrad Orthran Chronicles, as it were, is a series waiting to happen. But so I would have approached it differently if he was around in Heresy. I wouldn't have necessarily portrayed him in quite the same way.
Fair play.
So Eldrad was one of those awesome children from before.
Oh yeah, in Eldar terms, definitely.
Yeah, true. Hadn't thought of that.
He's only a kid. He's only a century old.
Century old. Yeah, and he thinks he's so big, going up to these like the best of humanity ever. Like, how arrogant does he think he is? I mean, I know we're above the Monkai, but seriously, mate, chill.
In fairness, he did throw Fulgrim a nice lunch.
That was a really nice lunch.
Didn't save him getting absolutely punked, but
No.
What? Just one Wraith Lord, a ton of Eldar, a Avatar, and most of his kin. Not too bad.
I do feel sorry for I don't know, we've said this before, I do feel sorry for the Avatar of Cain, because I swear, every character of note in lore has punked one Avatar of Cain in their life. Like, I swear everyone has. It's sort of like it's like the first raid boss that you just have to beat an Avatar to be considered a badass.
Yes, I think
Dante, Calgar, Lorgar,
Fulgrim.
Yeah, Fulgrim.
Fulgrim did nothing wrong.
Fulgrim did everything wrong.
Fulgrim did absolutely everything wrong.
He did it very well.
Oh, he did it with style, but very wrong.
The Griffith for 40k. As it were. Okay, this is probably the last question, just keeping an eye on the time.
Fair enough.
With all his worship being only second to that of the Emperor, would a Star Child, especially Sanguinius, be forming in the warp? So I'm guessing would there be a Sanguinius version of the Star Child?
That would be
Please,
neat.
no. I'm much happier with Sanguinius being dead in all intents and purposes, because it makes the Black Rage make much more sense.
Yeah, I mean, it would be, because again, the thing is, it's like it's not worship of the Emperor necessarily that would. It's not worship that creates chaos gods and stuff. It's a much more base emotion, a more aurora sort of thing. So while humanity, and I think in particular the idea of sacrifice for humanity could create a warp thing, which might not be an Emperor god. I think anything associated with that, so Sanguinius' sacrifice, would still feed into that greater whole, I think. And while I suppose in the same way that you get little warp storm bits peel off the main chaos gods and become entities, you could have a little subswirl of the main Emperor Storm being Sanguinius and kind of maybe identifying slightly as that. I think it's still it doesn't generate enough raw emotion. It's not, it's like, and again, a lot of the imperial kind of religion is very by rote, and kind of like it lacks the dedication. You don't necessarily swear your life to Sanguinius. He's revered as a saint and a savior and things, but actually you wouldn't sell your soul to him in the same way that you would become potentially, Sanguinius couldn't bless or corrupt you necessarily in the same way that a chaos god can, because it doesn't come from his worship and his presence doesn't come from a very raw human
standpoint.
And principle of existence. It's like whether it's hope or despair or ambition, which are the things that the chaos gods thrive on, which are very simple kernels of basic existence. Whereas a sophisticated idea can't really survive in that same sense.
Yeah, that's a very interesting way of looking at it. Sorry, you can't really say it any better than the way you have, and it is all down to player, reader, writer perception. And you see so much variance in the way, both as the way audiences treat how a book is put in front of them, and in how writers treat different characters. Because sometimes you'll see a character played a certain way, or a chapter portrayed in a certain manner, and then you'll see them somewhere else, and they're not quite the same. And it's interesting to see how they're done. Like the difference between how Aaron in Hell's Reach treated the salamanders compared to how Nick Kime writes the salamanders in his series, and so on.
Yes, and it's one of the, again, it came up at the weekend, really. It's quite, it kind of, as long as they kind of stay true to the kind of essential core of those characters or that chapter or that craft world and things, it's quite nice to get nuanced views on things. Like say, my Lorgar is not quite the same as Aaron's Lorgar, is not quite the same as Graham's Lorgar, or whatever it might be. But actually, that makes Lorgar a bit of a rounded character, more rounded character, because we've each got our own little peccadillos and takes on it. In the same way, in real life, nobody's ever 100% consistent to one particular principle or theme. We all have, hopefully, we all have slightly different aspects to ourselves depending on who we're with and what we're doing and things like that. So different authors actually expand characters slightly better than if you've just got one author writing them all the time.
Definitely.
As long as you don't get anything fundamentally wrong.
Good point.
And that's it for the questions this week. As always, if we didn't get a chance to answer your question, just leave a comment in the comment section below and we'll try and get to it next episode.
Yeah, and we're also aware that this has been a slightly more serious version of the podcast. We have not indulged in the memey questions quite as much as we usually do.
And me and Michael didn't fight.
No, to be fair, you've been
Busy.
you've been a bit busy, so it's just we haven't had the excuse to have an argument yet. But yeah, that's very true. It's been a slightly different podcast, but a very good one, and I'm sure something that many people in the community will be digesting going forward with all the ideas and theories that have been postulated. Just the joys of actually getting to speak to someone on a little bit on the inside, of being to not just validate what we see and what we believe, but also get a bit more of what the writers wanted us to see, and whether we saw it the right way and interpreted it in the way it was intended, or whether we came up with something better, even in some cases.
I was thinking about this the other day, because you kind of get the raw versus right, rules as written versus rules as intended. I think you apply the same as background as well. And so, but you've got to go with background as written or background as intended. Of course, which is a wider literary thing, like the whole idea of death as a writer and that kind of stuff. But and sometimes you just forget what you've written sometimes as well. I need to be reminded, especially if it's something that you kind of contradict later, but never mind.
Yeah, definitely. Because lore is intended, lore is written is what we call established canon that we put in our lore video. Lore is intended is what we try and do in our theory videos.
Right.
We're usually wrong, or we're just completely insane. But that's, I think, what we try and do is try and make sense of your contribution and everybody else's contribution to make a cohesive whole, and it trying to get what everybody was getting at, and say what did they intend in what they wrote, and make it fit with everybody. It's a wonderful, terrifying challenge, but it is something I do enjoy doing when I get the time, and I'm sure Remlays can corroborate that.
Indeed.
So I was going to say, it's basically what we face every time we have to write a story or book. Is like, how do I extrapolate this quite broad background, which was written for toy soldiers fighting each other, into a story about people and emotions and everything else?
Yeah,
that's a point. Speaking of those tiny little bits of lore being expanded upon, will we ever get a story about the War of the False Primark?
Who? What now?
The War of the False Primark. It was mentioned briefly in one of the Forge World Imperial Armor books.
Oh, geez, if it's in the Imperial Armor books, then that's a really obscure piece of lore.
What about the Gene Stealer cult on Terra?
Yeah, what about that? That's cool. Everything, and Orc Spores on Terra. They're around somewhere, because they get everywhere. And there's been Orcs on Terra, so therefore there'll be Orc Spores on Terra somewhere. Maybe Gene Stealer Orc Spores.
Gene Stealer or Avatar hybrids.
Hey, to be fair,
Green Stealers.
If you've evolved, that's how Gene Stealers survive. Orc hybrid survive, not being around other orcs. And how far away from other orcs do you want to get than within the least orky system in the galaxy?
That's very true.
That's not as stupid as it sounds.
Then one day you get a custodian just doing his routine patrol down the halls, and it's like, are those orcs? Where'd they get there?
I'm going to send some scrubber servitors down here. There's a few mushrooms more than I'm used to.
Yeah, I thought I was on break from all this nonsense with the Webway Gate. Why am I fighting again?
No, the only thing I'm thinking of is he's down there and he's just like, is this another blood game? Did Carl do this? I bet Carl did this.
But did they get any more Dreadnought Sarcophagus? Considering they ran out.
Oh, I don't know.
Oh my god.
The Custodians are a whole different kettle of fish, because they lost 90% of their numbers in the heresy. Now they're back at full strength again, but the Emperor personally oversaw the creation of every Custodian, so how does that work? It's like, the Custodians are so interesting.
What about the Sisters of Silence? They're literally 7 foot tall.
We could go on all day if we carry on, just bombarding random ideas or things that have come up.
Actually, Gav, that is a question. Is there any gene manipulation with the Sisters of Silence?
I don't know. I think one of the. I suspect there might have been, whether deliberate or not. I suppose, because again, it kind of ties into whatever happened to the pariah gene and the greater background of that, really. Because it's kind of tied into that psychic nullness, isn't it? Because I suppose the other thing is, during the Great Crusade, when everything is a little bit more organized, finding the pariah genes, and potentially I can imagine discovering, if the Emperor discovered the pariah gene, then he would be very interested in trying to propagate it in some way, it being the anti-chaos gene, really. So whether he did that with the Sister of Silence or in any other, or through any of the particular Primarks and stuff like that, could be explored, yeah.
Because all of the official GW artwork always has the Sisters of Silence shoulder to shoulder with Space Marines.
Right, yes. Yes, I don't know whether that's intentional or whether that's just artistic license. But
True.
but also just portraying them as, as kind of like as equals, literally within the artwork and within the miniatures, I suppose. But yeah, I mean, they could be. I think if we wanted to delve into their origins a bit more, there could be a bit more to it than just simply rounding up pariahs and then training them with Sisters of Silence. There has to be something a bit. The Emperor was very fond of creating specific things for specific jobs, whether it's Space Marines or Primarchs or Custodians and stuff. So you would think the Sisters of Silence would fall into that category of I need this. I need an anti-psychic force.
Yeah, and honestly, I think the Sisters of Silence, the Custodians, are in the perfect position, if that makes any sense at all, because they exist. There is information about them, like we know roughly where they came from, how they operate, but we don't know everything, and we have many, many questions, and that's sort of the perfect position for a faction to be in, as far as piquing somebody's interest, because there's enough to draw you in, but not enough to make you just be like, oh, fine, I know, move on. They're perfectly placed.
Kind of like the other sisters.
Quite.
Hint, hint, nod, nod.
Yeah, just wait for your codex, and then you'll get some answers, I hope.
No, I'll probably just get a bunch of stories of them getting slaughtered.
Not in their own codex, I'm sure. That would be rude.
They did that to the Tyranids in 6th edition.
That's because
Yes, that's true.
it's the Tyranids. If the Tyranids win, it always ends one way. There's kind of only so many ways you could write. Well, that's a lie. There are more than many ways you can write the Tyranids, but they're probably one of the hardest to inject personality into as a writer, I would wager. It must be probably one of the biggest challenges from a character perspective.
Well, you could always use
Nah, nonsense. You just take the Norn Queen, you have her own little TV show, where it's like the Norn Queen High. She's just like running around running a school of Tyranids. Okay, I'll stop.
Please.
And on that bombshell.
Damn it, you stole my line.
Oh, did I? All right.
No, it's fine. I don't mind. But yes, that marks the end of today's edition of Adeptus Podcast. It's been a little bit more serious and a bit different to usual, and we really hope you've enjoyed it as well. Thank you very much to Gav Thorpe for joining us. It has been an absolute insight fest and an absolute pleasure.
You're very welcome. If anyone has questions, they're free to contact me via my website, www.gavthorpe.co.uk, and they can sign up to a newsletter there, or I'm on Twitter and Facebook and stuff. So if people want to bug me with their really difficult lore questions, they can do it that way as well.
Yep, we'll link all the relevant details in the description. And what I might do, I don't know if I will, but if a series of comments come in that are aimed directly to you, I might forward them on, and you can answer them in a QA session sometime.
Yeah,
on your own time. I might do that if the comments decide to go to us rather than to you. We'll see how that goes. But in the meantime, thank you everybody for watching. My name has been Michael for Tactica Imperialis.
This has been Rome Lace from 40k Theories.
I'm Alexis. Love me.
And I'm Gav from the book thing.
Thank you very much for watching. Goodbye.